The M249 has been the standard squad automatic weapon for the United States military for some time. They've even been made right here in the United States.
The SAW, or the M249 as it's known, is the Squad Automatic Weapon, SAW. It is the standard light machine gun of the United States military forces throughout the world and a lot of our allies currently. It fires the standard NATO 5.56 ammunition and has been used extensively by the United States military since its introduction to the U.S. in 1984. Making its first combat appearance during the Panama crisis a few years later.
From a conceptual standpoint, the M249 was an outgrowth of the fact that the existing concept of the squad automatic didn't really fit modern doctrine anymore. The soldiers themselves, the riflemen in the squad, were transitioning to 5.56 millimeter fully automatic rifles. So the squad automatic in and of itself, it was losing its role. That role was being taken over by the individual rifleman. The one thing that they couldn't supply was sustained fire, which means two things. It means belt feed, and it means barrel change.
This era of transition is precipitated by the fact that the United States was fighting low-intensity, asymmetrical guerrilla warfare prior to that with the old M16 rifle. But when you were fighting an enemy, such as the Warsaw Pact nations, that it was really looking like we would ultimately confront in direct military action in the 1980s, it was looking like that was a likelihood, the United States military needed to transition to a heavier bullet that was enhanced in its penetrating capability, which is why the American military transitions away from the old 55 grain full metal jacket to the heavier green tipped 62 grain full metal jacket. And once we have made that transition, then we can look into adopting the Verviers designed Mini-Me or miniature machine gun in the form of the FN M249.
The FN Mini-Me became commercially available in 1982, and the U.S. military looked at it and said, you know what, this is the best gun of its type. This is the best belt-fed 5.56 caliber gun that we're going to find. Now, the gun could take magazines, the standard M16 magazine, or it could take a belt. And the U.S. military was very worked up because, you know, it had a rate of fire with the belt that was different than the magazine. Well, of course it did. But they also wanted some other changes. They wanted a buffer system in there. They wanted a heat shield. They wanted plastic furniture. And so even though it was adopted, they kept making changes and messing around with it, so it didn't really enter service until 1985.
But even as it's just being adopted, the M249, as it's being used by the American military, it suddenly has a moratorium. So just as the weapon is being introduced in the United States military service, a product improvement program is being considered. This leads to a pause in production from 1985 until 1994. And during that critical time period, a number of important and necessary changes are made in the overall design of the FN M249. And once production resumes after 1994, this is a firearm that suddenly looks very familiar to anyone who has served within the American military during the last 20 years. It's a firearm that carries us all the way from the invasion of Panama in 1989 through all the other conflicts between it, leading all the way to the global war on terror, and it's a firearm that still equips American military forces to this day.
One of the great characteristics of the M249 is its versatility. It can be deployed on top of vehicles, it can be deployed from fixed defensive positions, and it's transportable enough, it's easy enough to carry and maneuver with that advancing or patrolling troops can also use it. It's 17 pounds, which may seem heavy for an individual weapon, but considering that the soldiers train with 40 to 60 pound rucks, adding 17 pounds in a machine gun, you know, it's really not a bad trade, especially when it gives that patrol or that advancing element sustainable suppressive fire in a fully automatic weapon. Some of the climates and environments where the M249 has seen service, where the SAW has seen service, such as in Iraq or Afghanistan, it can be rough on firearms, especially those like the M249 that fire from an open bolt, that are belt fed, that have the opportunity to inadvertently suck up debris and dirt and anything you might not want in the action of your machine gun. However, the 249, it performs well and it's easy to service, and maybe that's one of its best characteristics. It's fairly easy to disassemble. Soldiers in basic training train over and over and over again assembly and disassembly of the M249, and that creates operators who are quickly able to identify issues in the field and correct them.
It was an idea that I think attempted to sort of rewrite the concept of the machine gun with regard to its payload and delivery capabilities in terms of its ammunition, but it nonetheless conformed to the traditional design parameters and operational capabilities of the general purpose machine gun.